Today we're going to be taking a look at the PC performance in the open beta for Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, which is set to be launching on May 30th, so not too much longer before this game is going to be coming out from Tripwire Interactive, who are also responsible for the original Rising Storm game, which was set in the Pacific Theater with Americans and the Japanese during World War II, and prior to that they had Red Orchestra 2, and between both of those games I have quite a few hundred hours, I would say, into those games. So I'm a big fan of this franchise, kind of making like a sort of affordable World War II shooters that have a little bit more realistic physics and, soldier movement compared to something like maybe say Battlefield. And these games are only $30. So this game, when it comes out, it'll be $30. If you pre-order, it's $23 on Steam, or you can get it over on CD Keys with my link I'll leave down in the description below. I think they have it for $16 or $17 right now. So yeah, if you guys want to pick it up, it's going to be coming out pretty soon, May 30th. And like I said, I was a big fan of the previous ones, and so far playing this, it's just been a natural progression going from, the original Rising Storm Red Orchestra 2 to this. There's really not any huge surprises as far as the way the game feels or the guns or anything like that, at least for me. Everything feels kind of, similar. It seems like they've done a very good job of balancing between the Vietnamese forces and the American forces, where, the Americans have like M16s with burst fire, and then the Vietnamese, they have like AK-47s that are full auto, but they have an insane amount of recoil. So there's always like a really good balance in the Red Orchestra and the Rising Storm games. That's kind of that's what I kind of like about these games the most, is that they will kind of hold one team back in a certain way, but they'll give an advantage in another way that maybe kind of counteracts the other team's advantage that they have. So they've always struck a very good balance, at least for me, in regards to the way that the different sides are matched up, and also on the maps and the modes. It's like they put a lot of thought into every map, every mode, and every, side of the team, so that it's all balanced out perfectly, something that, some other games could probably take a cue from. But we're going to be focusing on the PC performance here. I did testing with my Ryzen 1400 system with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. Also did test my 1080 Ti inside the i7 6800K system. Everything, of course, on the latest drivers. So for NVIDIA, that's 382.19, and on the AMD side, it is 17.5.2. And for overclocking, I did have my CPUs and the GPUs all overclocked for this testing. For both Pascal graphics cards from NVIDIA, I had an additional 200 megahertz on the core and 300 megahertz on the memory, while for the RX 480, I had it up to 1400 megahertz on the core and 2150 megahertz on the memory. And for the CPUs, my 6800K, I keep at 4.3 gigahertz, and the Ryzen 1400 was running at 3.7 gigahertz. But let's get into the options menu now, so you guys can get an idea of the graphics settings that I was using for all of my testing. You can see right now I am running in full screen mode, but they did have borderless window or windowed mode, and they do have 4K support, so no issues with any of that. The quality level is set to custom right now because I'm disabled a few things like motion blur, depth of field, and frame rate smoothing, which I'll go over. Quality level, though, you can see you have ultra high, medium, low, lowest, or custom, which I'm on right now. Post-processing style, which will add kind of a visual effect to the game. You can have it on authentic, which is what I left it on. They've also got enhanced, war movie, and Woodstock experience. Authentic was the default setting, so that is what I chose to leave it on, and I did also run VSync off. You can see here we do have hardware accelerated physics, and I did leave that on for all my testing, and then everything else in here I had up the highest that it would go under the advanced settings. So we've got world detail, character detail, texture detail, shadow quality, particle FX, anti-aliasing, which they only have 3 different levels of FXAA, low, medium, or high, or you can toggle that off if you want to. We have post-processing quality, lighting quality, and foliage detail, which is, this only goes to high, by the way. This is the highest that all of these go. I know it looks like there's a little bit extra space here at the end, but I assure you that is the farthest that they go. And then down here, we've got bloom toggled on. I did not use motion blur because it's hideous. So I did use light shafts and SS ambient occlusion. Did disable depth of field, as it's not an effect I like to see in first-person shooters. I feel it blurs the background where I'm trying to see enemies, so I rather just personally see enemies than blur effects. And then frame rate smoothing. This, if you have a 60 hertz, it basically caps your frame rate to 62. So if you're running anything over a 60 hertz display, or if you don't want your frame rate capped, then turn that off. So that's what I left it on. There's an advanced thing here at the bottom, but this is the advanced thing. So those are all the settings that we were using here. So let's get into the performance now, where we'll start off at 1080p with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. And we did transition this time into doing 1% and 0.1% lows, as was requested by many of you guys out there in the comments and on TGW, asking for this in the performance testing. So minimum frame rates are no more. We're going to 1% lows and 0.1% lows to accompany the average frame rate. So like I said, we're going to start off at 1080p here with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. So the RX 480 for AMD ended up pulling in an average of 117 FPS with a 1% of 78. Sorry, this is the first time I've ever done this with the 1% and everything. Can you tell that? All right, so we got an average of 117. The 1% low was 78, and the 0.1% low was 54. While the GTX 1060 got an average of 115, a 1% low of 67, and the 0.1% low came in at 50. So clear cut across the board here, we could see that the 1080p, at 1080p, the RX 480 was winning. But there is something that we definitely need to discuss here in regards to the performance on this game, and that is the CPU bottleneck. This game basically seems to run off of like 1 or 2 cores at all times. You'll see one core pretty much pinned to 100%. That was the case in my 1080 Ti testing as well, where I would see basically one core constantly maxed out at 100%, and then there would maybe be like a second core at like 50 to 75%. But you know, most of the time this game seems to be pretty CPU bottlenecked as far as what the engine is doing, only allowing it to run off of one core, it seems, or maybe even two cores at the very most. So that is why we are seeing kind of a limit here in the frame rates, and you'll see in the GPU utilization on the screen how it is not at 100% all the time, and that's because it's hitting a bottleneck there with the engine not allowing it to basically on the CPU side. So kind of unfortunate that we are seeing that there, but either way, the RX 480 and the 1060 both ran the game very well, over 100 FPS at 1080p maxed out. And that's on the Ryzen 1400 at 3.7 gigahertz. So that's not, you know, a 5 gigahertz 7700K. It's a $180 processor at only 3.7 gigahertz, which is fairly slow. So even though that's a fairly slow per core processor compared to something like, the 7700K, it was still able to put up over 100 frames per second, with the CPU bottleneck present. So is that really going to, stop someone from playing the game? Maybe if you have a very slow IPC processor, then that could definitely get in the way of your GPU if you have something more powerful. So a lot of things to consider there. And you'll see that in 1440p now, where we barely lost any performance at all going to 1440p. And in 1440, you actually will see the GPU getting maxed out more because it's finally has, a GPU bottleneck as opposed to the CPU bottleneck being limited to 1 or 2 cores. So at 1440p, the RX 480 ended up getting an average of 101 with a 1% low of 72 and a 0.1% low of 50, while the GTX 1060 got an average of 112 with the 1% low at 68 and the 0.1% at 52. So we see a shift there where the GTX 1060 won at 1440p, and I ran this test multiple times just to confirm it, and the RX 480 won at 1080p, and the GTX 1060 only lost 5 FPS average going to 1440p. So it barely lost anything in that transition, while the RX 480 lost like 16 FPS. Still not a lot. Normally in a game, if you were switching to 1080 to 1440p, you'd lose a lot more than 15 frames per second. So yeah, like I said, we're seeing the CPU bottleneck very present there at 1080p. At 1440p, not so much. So we see, right, like I said, the RX 480 is running it a little bit better at 1080p. 1440p, the 1060 is winning out there. And we'll now continue over to the GTX 1080 Ti, where I tested that at 1440p and 4K, and we did see the CPU bottleneck there showing up once again, but at 1440p testing, whereas at 4K, I was seeing the GPU getting pushed completely, but it ran both of these resolutions absolutely fine on my 6800K system. So at 1440p, we got an average of 140 FPS with a 1% low of 83 and a 0.1% low of 64, while at 4K, it managed to pull in an average of 123 frames per second with a 1% low of 78 and a 0.1% low of 54. So absolutely fine running this game in 4K. The RX 480 and the 1060 could both power this game over 100 FPS, even with a Ryzen 1400 CPU. So yeah, absolutely no issues really running this game on the cards that I tested. But as I mentioned there, we were seeing the CPU bottleneck at the lower resolutions. So if you're not getting full GPU utilization, you could probably look to up your resolution a bit. Maybe using something like DSR or virtual super resolution, whatever they call it on AMD side. So yeah, you can probably up the resolution a little bit if you're getting CPU bottleneck like I was here in my testing at lower resolutions, and then you will find yourself being more GPU bound at a higher res. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please let me know your thoughts on the PC performance for Rising Storm 2 Vietnam. I'm enjoying this game so far. It's, like I said, if you played the original Rising Storm, or if you played Red Orchestra 2 at all, then you know what you're getting into with this. It's very realistic as far as, bullet ballistics go, and the way that the players move around. It's a little bit more slow-paced and methodical compared to like a Call of Duty or a Battlefield. You really got to have a lot of team play. You have like a commander, and if you get that role of commander, like, you really need to, fall in with that role. Otherwise, your team is just going to get absolutely flattened if you're against a better team that communicates more. So that's really what it can come down to, is that you don't necessarily need to be the fastest person at aiming at the other guy. The team that has the better communication, I feel, and the better tactics is going to be the team that wins most of the time. So that's really what this game is all about, more so than just run, shoot people, run, shoot a guy, die, respawn, because there is a big penalty for when you die. When you die, you got to run back a long distance. So you find that out very early on playing this game, that if you're going to run in and just, spray until you die, you're probably going to get bored pretty quick with having to run another 300 meters into combat. So take that into account if you are thinking about picking this game up. You can get it over on CD Keys and save a few dollars, or get it on Steam for $23 right now if you pre-order. And the open beta is going on for this weekend, so if you want to get it, all you got to do is open up Steam, search Rising Storm 2, and install it, and you'll be able to play it at least just for this weekend. So let me know your thoughts, as always, down in the comments below. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it and you appreciated the 1% and 0.1% lows being introduced into our performance testing, and I will catch you guys next time. Tura.